کانال مستندهای پارسی.
In 1979, a revolution topples Iranian ruler Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and with that, a monarchy of more than 2,500 years.
Ich habe zunächst nicht an einem Umbruch geglaubt.
That's the way authoritarian regimes fall. First gradually, and then suddenly.
The Shah's mistake was to want to do too much, too fast.
Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Persia's last emperor, was a key figure in world politics in the second half of the 20th century. His fiercest opponent, Ruhollah Mousavi Khomeini. The Ayatollah becomes the bearer of hope for all those who are against the Shah.
Die beiden sind tatsächlich Gegenpole, so wie ihr gesellschaftliches Bild, so auch ihre beiden Personen.
They became very fierce antagonists, absolutely. And the Shah developed an almost obsession with them.
Their rivalry lasted for almost their entire lives. In the end, the Shah is defeated, the Ayatollah is victorious, and with him, Islamic fundamentalism, a new challenge for world politics. In September 1941, a young man becomes the new ruler of Iran. At just 21 years of age, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is sworn in as the new head of state in the Iranian parliament, in the middle of the Second World War. His father, Reza Shah Pahlavi, had remained neutral, but he made no secret of his sympathies for the Nazi regime. The Allies demanded his resignation. Since Hitler's attack on the Soviet Union, the British and the Americans depend on Iran for the transport of heavy war materials to Russia, for the fight against the German Reich.
Als der Vater nach seiner Abdankung Iran verlassen hat, blieb Mohammad Reza zurück. Also der Vater Reza Shah hat ihn auch zurückgelassen, hat eben auch gesagt, du musst das hier übernehmen, du bleibst hier.
Mohammad Reza had been prepared for this task by his father from an early age. Among his siblings, he has a special role as crown prince. His father selects his playmates and sends him to a Swiss elite boarding school to give him a Western education. Finally, he tells him who to marry. It's the Egyptian princess Fawzia. With the arranged marriage between the two dynasties, the father wants to reinforce the Pahlavi's power in Iran.
And he was a very, very powerful, charismatic figure who completely dominates the son's life.
300 kilometers southwest of Tehran, the oasis town of Khomeini is situated. In 1902, Ruhollah Mousavi Khomeini is born in a house on the outskirts of that town, the youngest of 6 children. He never meets his father. His father is murdered when he is 5 months old under suspicious circumstances. Khomeini will later hold Reza Shah accountable.
Until the end of his days, Ayatollah Khomeini thought that Reza Shah personally had intervened and to save the murder. That was that bitterness left in him, because in his writings, every now and then he says those whose fathers have been killed by Reza Shah.
Khomeini grows up without a father. This will impact him all his life. His mother takes Khomeini to a wealthy aunt who makes sure he receives a good education. At 5 years of age, Khomeini starts school. A village teacher teaches him how to read and write. He's a fast learner. Among his classmates, he's the most gifted. While others play, he studies and reads the Quran. Before Reza Shah was forced to abdicate, he had started extensive reforms in Iran. He wanted Persia to become a modern state. This included the fact that women were no longer allowed to wear a chador, the traditional veil. The clergy saw this as an assault on religious matters and protested. For Khomeini, who was studying Islamic theory of law by then, this was a fundamental violation of the principles of Islam.
Khomeini war ein politischer Geistlicher, auch schon bevor er wirklich öffentlich auftrat. Kann man das auch festmachen an seinen Schriften. Also wir haben ein Traktat von ihm, Kashful Asrar, also die Enthüllung der Geheimnisse, heißt dieser Titel. Darin greift er sehr stark Reza Shah an.
Reza Shah's abdication under pressure from the Allies must have been greatly gratifying for him. He demands that Iran will now be ruled according to Islamic law again. This demand doesn't have any effect yet. Reza Shah dies in exile in South Africa in 1944. If not before, now with his son transferring the body, all eyes are on the new Shah. People wonder how he will solve the conflict with the clergy.
کانال مستندهای پارسی.
So far, he'd been perceived as rather restrained by the public.
As Shakespeare says, some have greatness thrust upon them and some seize greatness. Mohammad Reza Shah had the monarchy thrown upon him. And there was a big difference with someone who goes and grabs power and creates the modern state with someone who was essentially a reluctant king.
The young Shah acts surprisingly resolutely. Like his father, he wants to modernize state and society, but end his father's confrontational course with the clergy. His subsequent opponent, Khomeini, now teaches Islamic theory of law. He finds a sympathetic ear in younger students who become radicalized. One group names themselves Fadaiyan-e-Islam. These martyrs of Islam are Shiite fundamentalists. They come from the ghettos of Tehran and demand the establishment of a theocratic state on the basis of the Quran. Any Western influence is to be banned. Women must wear veils in public again.
Within a couple of years, they really became very important because first of all, they assassinated a top intellectual, Mr. Ahmad Kasravi, who campaigned against Islam as a whole. Then they proceeded further and assassinated the Prime Minister, General Razmara. And Khomeini was the cleric who gave them clerical cover. Because, you know, in Islam, or at least in Shiite Islam, you can't just go and kill somebody unless a clerical authority writes a fatwa, as, for example, like Khomeini wrote against Salman Rushdie.
In early 1949, there's an assassination attempt on the Shah as well. It was probably carried out by a terror group, but this has never been proven. The Iranian parliament blames the Moscow-following Tudeh party and bans it. This comes in useful for the Shah, for communist ideology is equally as suspicious to him as is radical Islam. His political path is directed towards the West.
I'm looking forward with the keenest anticipation to all that I have to experience here in the greatest of the democracies in a free world.
In November 1949, the American President Harry S. Truman and the American people welcome Shah Mohammad Reza exuberantly. But not exactly selflessly. They want to secure access to the huge oil reserves in Iran. The Shah, on the other hand, needs support for his plans to modernize Iran from the bottom. He's interested in all technical innovations like the Hoover Dam. Not everyone likes his enthusiasm for the West.
Das Land war total abhängig. Der Schah war abhängig von den Amerikanern und von den Briten. Und wir wollten ein unabhängiges Land haben. Ein Land, das sein Schicksal selbst in die Hand nimmt, selbst entscheidet.
The global economic boom after the war requires fuel. Oil. In Abadan, near the Persian Gulf, the world's greatest refinery is built. Since the beginning of the 20th century, oil production had been mainly in British hands. In Iran, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company is like a state within a state. When the Iranian parliament decides to nationalize the oil industry in March 1951, Great Britain pulls the oil plug on Iran. Many British experts have to leave the country. The takeover of the oil facilities by a national company is cheered on boisterously, but the oil embargo soon forces the country's economy to its knees. Extremist parties like the Communist Tudeh party take advantage. They become very popular. The Shah temporarily flees into exile, out of the line of fire. The mullahs and their followers, and different political groups like the communists who aim for the abolition of the monarchy and a people's republic, fight for dominance in Iran. The Shah only manages to stay in power through the intervention of the USA. The American Secret Service, CIA, supports him with a lot of money and helps him to establish his own secret service, the Sabak.
Our Shah became a kind of Roman Caesar, involved in day-to-day business, involved in day-to-day wars, and if, like the Roman Caesar, you become involved in day-to-day, like Julius Caesar, somebody will kill you.
During this time, Khomeini doesn't make any public statements on political questions. He withdraws to his house in the holy city of Qom, where he lives with his wife and children. Only his most dedicated followers come to see him, but they don't say a word about what Khomeini discusses with them either. In solitude, the clergyman continues his work on his ideas for the Islamization of the Iranian state, discreetly but with confidence. He is extremely confident when he meets the Shah in person. On behalf of the Grand Ayatollah, Khomeini asks the Shah to pardon one of the assassins from the terror group Fadayan-e-Islam, successfully.
کانال مستندهای پارسی.
The Shah definitely wants dialogue with the mullahs. He keeps going on pilgrimages to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, Islam's central pilgrimage site. As a Muslim, he shows respect for Islam and accepts the religious authority of the imams. But such publicity performances always serve multiple interests.
His religious feelings, I think, came from his mother. We know his mother was very religious. His father clearly was not. His politics towards religion has nothing to do with his religiosity. His politics to religion has to do with his fear that the greatest threat to Iran will come from the communists, and that the way to fight the communists is by strengthening religion. And that's exactly what he does.
Any ally in the fight against the influence of the Communist Soviet Union is fine with the Shah. Therefore, he tries to win over the clergy, which was traditionally anti-communist and monarchist. It's a calculation which won't add up.
He certainly thought that that ideological backing was religion. And that's, again, another mistake that he made. Religion, particularly as incarnated by the Shia clergy, could never have become the ideological framework on which to build modernization and westernization.
In December 1959, there are pompous festivities in Tehran. Tabloid reporters from all over the world fight for the best picture of Mohammad Reza Shah and Farah Diba. After 2 divorces, the new queen needs to produce the desired successor to the throne, so that the Pahlavi dynasty can live on. Farah Diba becomes an influential woman at the side of her husband. She also accompanies him on his trip to America in April 1962, where the couple are received frenetically. The Shah seeks to deepen Iranian-American relations with President John F. Kennedy. Both agree that only a strong military can fend off the latent threat of the Soviet Union. Arming Iran is a done deal. For the Americans, it's a valuable business. Weapons for oil.
Die Amerikaner haben die modernsten Waffen dem Schah zur Verfügung gestellt, seine Militärs aufgebaut. Es gab unzählige militärische Berater im Iran. Die haben bestimmt, was gemacht wird und was nicht gemacht wird. Und alles, was sie gemacht haben, diente bestimmt nicht der Demokratie.
In the 1960s, Iran was still a developing country. Most of the people were farmers without their own land. The land belonged to feudal masters and land barons, including a number of mullahs and religious trusts. On the 11th of January 1963, the Shah introduces an extensive program of reforms. He calls it the White Revolution. Its aim is to markedly improve the conditions of life for the people.
انقلاب سفید موقعی که علازت تصمیم گرفتن واقعا تصمیم و فکر خودشون بود، برای که همونطور که گفتم ایشون میخواستن مملکتشون، هموطنانشون پیشرفته بشن، جلو برن.
A national referendum strengthens the ambitious program, which includes the abolition of the feudal system, privatization of state-owned companies, the fight against illiteracy, and the introduction of women's voting rights. Women are not allowed to take part in the referendum yet. However, they flock to the polling stations to demonstrate their approval.
He wanted Iran to modernize. The White Revolution was intended to make Iran better. And it did. In many, many ways it did. It ended feudalism in Iran. That's not an easy thing to do.
The starting point of the White Revolution was a land reform against the determined resistance of the clergy. The Shah hands over more than 500,000 hectares of land, an area twice the size of Luxembourg, to some 30,000 destitute families.
یه دلیل این بود که فکر می‌کردیم، یعنی گفته می‌شد در اون زمان شایع بود که زیر فشار آمریکایی‌ها رژیم شاه این کار کرده، بنابراین این برای تامین کننده هدف‌های استعماری امپریالیستیه و به نفع مردم ایران نیست و یه چیز فرمایشی هست به دستور خارجی‌ها، به دستور آمریکایی‌ها.
In order for children to learn reading, writing and maths, soldiers teach them in village schools. Adult farmers and nomads have to go back to school. The Shah involves all strata of the population in his campaign.
Es gab eine Armee zur Alphabetisierung und nicht tatsächliche Bildung. Und ich meine, es ist gut, wenn die Leute alphabetisiert sind, aber Alphabetisierung bedeutet nicht politische Bildung. Das ist ein sehr großer Unterschied. Und politische Bildung wurde überhaupt sowohl an den Schulen als auch an den Universitäten verboten.
Khomeini takes on the role of a mouthpiece for a group of mullahs who reject this policy as pro-Western.
در اون زمان آیت الله خمینی عنوان فردی شمرده میشد که این خواسته های مردم رو، خواسته های معترضان و مخالفان رو بازگو میکرد و با شجاعت و شهامت اینها رو پیگیری میکرد. از این جهت هم ما از آیت الله خمینی حمایت میکردیم.
Khomeini war zu der Zeit, als er dann wirklich öffentlich auftrat, eben nicht mehr der junge Geistliche, der vorher war in Rom, der sich über Reza Shah beschwert hatte, der sich dann eben auch zurückhielt aus Respekt vor seinen Lehrern, sondern zu der Zeit war er dann eben auch schon Großayatollah, hatte sich dann eben auch schon eine ansehnliche Anhängerschaft versammelt und konnte dann natürlich auch, hatte ein ganz anderes Mobilisierungspotenzial.
Khomeini takes advantage of his gain in power. He abandons his hitherto withdrawn position and openly opposes the Shah's politics. For the first time, he publicly warns him not to carry on with his father's ways.
Khomeini sent a couple of letters directly addressed to the Shah, and the Shah gave a couple of speeches directly responding to them. I've quoted those at length in the Shah book, and they're remarkable. Khomeini, for his defiance, telling the Shah, boy, don't do something so that I throw you out of the country like your father. And the Shah saying these little, the word is like ants, like who survive in feces. We are not going to let them rule this country.
Strengthening the role of women in Iranian society is an integral part of the White Revolution. Iranian women grasped this opportunity to make public use of their newly acquired rights and the associated self-confidence. Women can not only vote now, they can also become political candidates. For Iranian women, this is a milestone on their path to emancipation.
آزادی زنان که خیلی مهم بود، برصد حقوقی که زنان گرفتن بعد در مقایسه با خیلی ممالک اروپایی جلوتر بود.
But there was a lot of resistance, and the first revolution in '63 happened, led by Khomeini, happened specifically on this particular item of the voting decree.
For Khomeini and his followers, the new role of women in politics and society is a threat to the foundation of their faith. They mount a counterattack. Khomeini denounces corruption, state violence and the torture used by the state.
کانال مستندهای پارسی